Yo, what is going on, you guys, and welcome back to a brand new video. I am so sorry that I've been absent for such a long time. However, I am back with a brand new fanfiction. I plan to mainly make videos like this now, as I'm noticing that these videos are the ones that are requested the most. However, when a big piece of news drops on something Spider-Man related, I will most likely make a video about that as well. However, without further ado, this will be split into three main sections. This is part one and will be a little slower than the next two, but it is here to reintroduce us to all of our characters and really engage us into the new adventure and the new story for both Miles Morales and Peter Parker. So let's get into this. Marvel's Spider-Man 2, Part 1. Fallout. Dr. Octavius has been defeated and things have calmed down for Peter Parker. He had once again came out on top and made sure the city is safe. But now it's time to settle down. Him and MJ are back together finally, and Peter calls her up and asks if she's interested in moving in with him. After all, Peter is moving into Aunt May's house in Queens. MJ agrees and they start moving their stuff in together. With the addition of Queens in this game, this would allow for a bigger map of New York, which would include the original city from Miles Morales and the first game, and now Queens, which will be a whole new section to explore as Spider-Man. However, there is one problem that MJ and Peter face. MJ's wage can't keep the house going by herself, especially since there is two of them living together, and obviously Peter is Spider-Man. MJ says to Peter that he needs to get some sort of low-key job, and Peter agrees. MJ says that he could come back to the Daily Bugle and take photos of himself again, and Peter disagrees, saying that he doesn't want to work for that Rut Jameson again. He wants his life to move forward and do something science-related, like he was with Dr. Otto Octavius. MJ says that she's heard Dr. Connors, their old high school teacher, is now working with Oscorp, and suggests that talking to him about a job could actually get him in Oscorp. Peter says that's a great idea and immediately is on his way to Oscorp. This is the part in which the tutorial of the game would take place. When you're on your way swinging towards Oscorp, there will be a crime that is going down at a feast outpost. Basically, I'll quickly explain what a feast outpost is. After the first game and Miles Morales, the city has come under huge stress from the amount of destruction and people seeking health, homes, and food. So therefore, Feast is expanded under leadership of Rio Morales by expanding and creating lots of new outposts around the city, whilst the main Feast Center created by Martin Lee still stands as the main operating center. These centers will allow Spider-Man to do some side missions around the city with civilians and helping out. This will go for Peter and Miles. However, Miles will get his own little side quests with the Feast Outpost, and I'll explain that a little bit later. This first fight scene is here to reintroduce the audience to fighting as Spider-Man, potentially showcasing us some new combat abilities that weren't in the first game. MJ later turns up to the crime scene once it's all dealt with, taking notes for an article. MJ tells Peter that this is the third crime to happen in quick succession to one of the Feast Outposts. MJ thinks something suspicious is going on. Peter says to call him if she finds anything, and Peter in turn also says he'll speak to Miles about it, as he knows his mother runs Feast now. After the crime is dealt with, he goes to Oscorp. Peter walks up to the front desk, asks if he can speak with Dr. Connors. The receptionist says he needs to book an appointment. But just as Peter was about to agree, Norman is rushing past out of the front door on mayor business and bumps into Peter. They greet each other warmly, however Peter is slightly on the suspicious side after the wrongdoings exposed by MJ in the previous game. However, Norman leaves his condolences with him after the death of Aunt May, and Peter thanks him. Norman asks him what is he doing here, and Peter says he was just trying to book an appointment with Dr. Connors. He's after a job. And Norman is absolutely exasperated. He says he could give him one of the highest paying jobs in Oscorp right now on the spot. Norman knows how smart Peter is. After all, he used to be best friends with Harry in school. Peter says that's quite alright. He'd like an interview with Dr. Connors because he wants to make it on his own steam. Norman says he highly respects that, as that is the process that Norman had to go through to get as high as the ranks as he did. Norman in this moment sees a lot of himself in Peter, which really connects and bonds the two in this scene. Norman will say he'll have to go now though because he's late for a council meeting. He's on mayor business. Norman leaves and Peter turns back to the receptionist, as the receptionist says she'll book him in with Dr. Connors straight away. Peter says thank you and leaves. We cut to a bit later in the story after the reintroduction to some side missions and events that you can partake in around the city, and also introducing us to suits and abilities we can unlock. One of the most notable ones here being the Iron Spider inspired Doc Ock arms, which were shown in the trailer for the game. We are reintroduced to Miles Morales as both the Spider-Men meet up. They catch up with one another and discuss the Feast Outposts that are being attacked. Miles assumes that it was just a coincidence because they get some raids every once in a while by some punk thugs. Peter says that MJ thinks that they are connected. Peter says that he thinks it might be to do with Martin Lee and the demons. Maybe someone is out for revenge of some kind. This is when we cut to MJ for the first stealth mission of the game. Now, I know a lot of people didn't like the MJ stealth missions, but I really thought it cut the story up quite well and allowed breathing room for all of the Spider-Man stuff that was happening as well. MJ is investigating the attacks on the feast centers, which leads her to an outpost controlled by a bunch of people who used to work for none other than Tombstone. On the side mission, she finds out that Martin Lee and the demons used to do some dodgy trading with Tombstone, and it turns out that some weapons that Martin Lee bought were never paid off, since he was defeated by Spider-Man. Therefore, they're going after Martin Lee's legacy and destroying what he has left, which is obviously the feast-controlled stuff. MJ finds out that they are planning to attack the main feast center building after slowly picking off one by one all the feast outposts around the city. MJ will call Peter in desperation and tell him all of this info. However, during the call, one of the men hears her on the phone and kidnaps her, putting a stake in the fight. Peter and Miles head to the feast center together. Now, this will be the first big mission of the game where you get to switch between Miles and Peter in combat. This mission will allow you to work with the other Spider-Man while fighting the guards, introducing many new combat abilities. We also get reintroduced to Rio Morales in this scene as well. However, in the fight, she is injured. After the fight is finished between Tombstone's men and the Spider-Men, Peter goes on to rescue MJ, and everything is back to the status quo. We switch over and play as Miles for a while. This part of the start of the game will properly let us dive back into Miles' story from his perspective. He will take Rio home by swinging her back to their apartment. They will both reflect on Miles becoming Spider-Man and the effect that it's had on his life. After all this has happened, we get introduced to a brand new side quest tutorial specific to Miles Morales, which is to help rebuild all of the destroyed feast outposts by Tombstone's men. The tutorial one will happen here, however, these side quests can be completed throughout the entire game and can be done at any time. While all this is happening, we will also get reintroduced to Genki, and him and Miles will have a nice little scene together, and just generally at this point in the game we'll get reintroduced to a bunch of other Miles stuff and continuing his story. After this has happened, we will switch back over to Peter for a couple of days later as he is on his way to the interview with Dr. Connors. It will go well and Peter will get the job. Dr. Connors remembers Peter from high school and how he was always late. Peter will remember battling him as the Lizard in his early days of Spider-Man. This scene is where we are really introduced to Dr. Connors, and after the scene we will learn of his past as the Lizard in this universe and how he's finally settled down and has a loving family. However, we will learn of his secret addiction to carrying on, trying to replenish his arm. You see, Dr. Connors never let it go after he became the Lizard, and the stubborn personality that he is in secret to this day, trying to figure out a solution to fixing his arm. In the same scene revealing this, Norman will walk in on him and ask for his help. Dr. Connors will cover it suspiciously and then will go with Norman. We are then transitioned into a scene with Harry Osborn in the tank, reintroducing this storyline. They are both doing vigorous tests with the symbiote. This scene is where we really get introduced in depth to this universe's version of the symbiote. We learn that using it as it stands would have major side effects, including aggression, change in personality, etc., and a wide range of different things as well. Norman and Connors are there to enhance it and to improve upon it. We really learn a lot about the symbiote in this scene. However, Harry is slowly dying, and we will get the sense that Norman is running out of time. There will be this overlooping sensation in the atmosphere of this scene, just telling the audience that Norman is getting desperate. He doesn't want his son to die, just as his wife did. We then cut later in the story to a scene with Miles and Peter. They are talking about Spider-Man stuff on top of a building, and Peter is telling Miles how he thinks he's ready and there's not much more he can teach him. Miles jokes about how there might be a few things that he can teach Peter. The scene gets deeper and we'll have a real bonding session between the two. Miles goes on to talk about Uncle Aaron and his best friend Finn, going into detail about the events of Miles Morales. He says that everyone in his life that he gets close to seems to go down a dark path, and that for some reason he can never stop it until it's too late. This scene's purpose right here is to set up Miles' character arc for the game. Peter will joke to him and says that after 8 years I think he's good because it'll never happen to him. Miles will laugh back and they'll both swing off together. Back to the Oscorp storyline, Peter is at its first day at work at Oscorp. We will get to play a scene here exploring the building on the inside, which I think would be really cool. This scene we will get more time with Dr. Connors. However, during this, Peter will find out Connors' secret after glancing over some research Connors is doing. Peter will question him on it, and Connors will say that no one is meant to know about that. Peter says that he can keep it secret, and after hearing about how his life is back on track and how he has a family, Peter feels remorse for Dr. Connors and feels like he can help him. Peter in his spare time comes up with a formula himself that he trusts will work on Connors to help him finally grow his arm back. Peter thinks to himself that if he can finally solve this issue of Dr. Connors growing his arm back, then that finally then eliminates any risk of him ever becoming the Lizard ever again. So Peter therefore goes through with his plan. After a couple of more Oscorp scenes, cutting to later on in the story, Peter manages to come up with a formula that can finally solve Dr. Connors' problem. He will thank Peter for his scientific efforts, once again creating a very wholesome atmosphere within the scene. And then he takes it. Surprisingly, the formula actually works, and Dr. Connors' arm is whole again as it grows back. However, a couple of days in, his arm starts to decay, and by the end of day 3, Dr. Connors' new arm is gone, and he's back to square one. Peter notices this one day at work and feels for Connors. He was so close to having his hand back for life. However, this fuels Connors' obsession even further. He was so close to having his arm back for life until it was just all stripped away from him. Connors is not going to give up here. He'll sneak into work after hours and then steal Peter's formula. He makes tweaks to it so it can last longer, and he thinks he finally has it as he stays up all night trying to perfect it. He injects it into himself, and well, you could guess what happens next. This is where the story properly picks up and we swing into some proper action. This event right here is what puts the story into full force for the rest of the game. Peter wakes up the next morning to MJ telling him about reports of a giant lizard roaming New York, similar to the one seen 7 years ago. Peter can't believe what he's seeing. MJ questions him on it, and Peter says that he gave him that formula, but Peter believed that it would work until it didn't. MJ says maybe it managed to still turn him into the lizard somehow, and Peter says to MJ that he made sure it wouldn't, but now he has to go and fix this mess. MJ says to Peter that she's going to go out on a reporting mission about this lizard creature. Peter tells her to be careful, and MJ says you too. Then straight after this, Miles calls Peter telling him about this giant lizard that is roaming the streets of New York. Peter says he knows, and Miles says no, he's fighting it right now. And that's when we cut to the first big action boss battle in this game. We cut over to Miles Morales as he is fighting the lizard. The main aim of this mission is to hold your own as Miles until Peter can show up to the scene. Miles uses his Venom Blast, which will keep the lizard at bay. Miles fights the lizard in his most intense battle yet. I want this fight to also show how Miles isn't quite as strong or experienced as Peter at this point in his Spider-Man career. I think this scene will showcase this perfectly, since Lizard is one of Spider-Man's fiercest foes. Peter will eventually arrive on the scene, and both of them will fight the lizard together until it escapes into the sewers and away. Peter seems really angry with himself. How could he let this happen a second time? He knew the risks, but he just decided to go for it anyway. Peter knows, and Miles knows, that this just got serious. They have to find the lizard before anything happens to the innocents of the city, or worse, Dr. Connors himself. So that is it for part 1 of Marvel's Spider-Man 2. This is the first part of 3, so I want to remind you guys to hit that notification bell and hit the subscribe button if you have not already, to not miss the next part of this 3-part series. I cannot wait to bring it to you. Hopefully you are enjoying it, but like I did say at the start of the episode, that this is more of a slow reintroduction to a lot of the characters, setting up the plot lines. But trust me, in part 2 it gets absolutely bonkers, so make sure you stick around. Make sure to hit a like on it if you did enjoy this video, and also make sure to comment down below to tell me what you thought of this part. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, what you changed, what you'd keep the same. I want to hear all of your thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, and peace.